Welcome to another episode of my life and times in the motor trade. My name is Barrie Crampton, and this episode is called You Pay Peanuts, You Get Monkeys. Now, finding good staff in the motor trade is a huge problem. Not because they don't exist, but because nobody will pay them what they're worth. Hence an often used phrase, which seems to be used a lot to describe garage employees. You pay peanuts, you get monkeys. It was a time when I was very busy selling cars, and I was also covering for the parts and the service manager at the time. The parts manager had to leave suddenly when his lab coat split. All the parts he was pinching dropped out and rolled all over the showroom floor. There weren't enough hours in the day, and to make matters worse, we had to keep all our sales cars in a compound behind the garage overnight, otherwise they'd just get vandalised and radios pinched and so on. The cars had to be put away every night and brought out every morning to display. In those days we were still on the old manual chokes, and a couple of quick starts and stops used to foul the plugs. This resulted in having to remove the spark plugs, clean them off, wire brush them, shot blast them, dry them off. And we had about 25 cars to put out, so it could be a long, arduous task. And it was made even longer by flat batteries and running out of petrol. It was decided that I needed an assistant. I was only about 25 then, so I put what I thought was a compelling argument as to why we should employ Debbie Harry. Sadly, my idea was a non-starter, as Debbie wasn't eligible for the government subsidised youth opportunity project. So a couple of weeks later, I was saddled with Richard. Richard was a very nice lad with a great temperament, but he didn't like football and he wasn't suited to the motor trade. If I'm honest, he was actually worse than a man short. It was my fault really, as I didn't have time to train him, and it was impossible for him just to learn on his own. He'd no idea about cars, but he did know everything there was to know about the pop group Guns N' Roses. I figured his brain was full of useless trivia about Guns N' Roses, and there was just no room left for any new stuff. I had a bit of a downer on Richard, and he didn't help matters by turning up to work wearing nail varnish and eyeshadow and glitter. His excuse was that he'd fallen asleep on his mate's settee in a drunken stupor, and his mate's girlfriend, who was a beautician, had used him as a mannequin and to practice makeup. Over the coming months, his story became more and more believable, as he obviously never looked in a mirror before he came out. His first job of the day was to make me a cup of tea. I was busy, and foolishly, without inspecting my cup of tea first, I took a swig, and I can remember it to this day, I had to spit it straight out. It was without doubt the worst drink I've ever tasted. There was what I can only describe as an oil slick on the top of it. It looked like my cup had been used to bail out the Exxon Valdez. It also had an overwhelming taste of Swarfiga, which no amount of wiping my tongue with my sleeve would get rid of. In an attempt to find out how he'd nearly poisoned me, I took him back to our kitchen, and it didn't take long to discover Richard made crap brews because he was left-handed. He made crap brews because he was left-handed? How's that work then? Well, let me explain. The mechanics also used the kitchen to wash their hands. The tub of Swarfiga was on the left-hand side of the sink, and laying there right in the middle of a pool of excess hand cleaner, the mechanics used to put their hands in the Swarfiga and then go over to the sink, so it would leave a trail of Swarfiga right the way along the work surface. Right in the middle of the trail of Swarfiga was where a lefty would put the spoon down. A normal lefty would have chosen a clean spot, but not Richard, right in the middle of the Swarfiga. Now, you would have think he would have learned, but he didn't. I think he was doing it on purpose to get out of making the drinks. Now, I'm a fairly stubborn guy and I was determined to break his spirit. But after a few weeks, my health began to suffer. I was blowing bubbles of swarfeger every time I spoke. Unless I could find a solution to the problem, Richard would have to go. But I couldn't go back to getting the cars out every morning. So necessity being the mother of invention, I came up with a brilliant idea. After a quick trip to the workshop, the problem was solved. I drilled a little hole through the teaspoon handle, wired it to the roof so it wouldn't actually reach the work surface. The wire was measured to precision. There was no way now. Richard had to stir my tea, Richard had to lift my cup up to the spoon and do it. And he could no longer poison me. Now, I'd been fixating on the terrible tea problem for a while, and I couldn't see past it. But it soon dawned on me that this wasn't Richard's only shortcoming. He called me urgently to the forecourt one day to point out the damage somebody had done when they'd reversed into one of our sales cars on the forecourt, and then they'd driven off without saying. I examined the damage, which extended underneath the car, underneath the rear bumper, and it had even dented the petrol tank. Unless it was a submarine that had done the damage, Richard was lying. A quick scan round the bollards on the forecourt revealed one that was broken in half. It also had a generous coating of Ford Doom Blue, which coincidentally was the same colour as the car that was damaged. To be fair to Richard, I'd reversed into plenty of things, so I couldn't be too mad at him. My motto is, at the garage, drive as slowly as you can on the forecourt. You will do less damage when you hit something, and you will hit something. I'd learned the hard way when I was sat at the wheel of an automatic Hillman Minx, staring at the moon. The car was at a 60-degree angle in our compound, where I'd reversed it into the foundations that had been dug for the new workshop. It hadn't crossed my mind that I'd end up there, but the car wouldn't select reverse. It was an automatic Hillman Minx, and it wouldn't select reverse gear. I put it in reverse, I revved it, and then it selected reverse gear, and I shot back into the foundations, and I ended up looking up at the moon in a car like so, and I had to keep jacking it up and putting wood under it until as it happened, it was my own car. So, but I wasn't sure how I was going to explain that to the insurance. I cursed the workshop foundations. They were no use for anything. We weren't even going to build it. It was just a scam, just to pacify Vauxhall and show them that we intended to expand, but we didn't really. Our zoning was on, you need a bigger workshop, you need this, you need that. And we just did it to keep him happy. As soon as he'd filled in his report and ticked a few boxes, he'd move on to his next harebrained idea, and then the foundations would just be filled in again forever. Back to Richard. I used to dread him coming to my office in the morning. He wouldn't pick his feet up. It sounded like there was a zombie approaching. He was very pale, so most days it looked like there was a zombie approaching too. He'd stick his head round the corner, he'd stick his head round the door and say, with a big smile on his face, "What do you want me to do next?" To which I would reply with a list of jobs that he had to do every single day. But he insisted on coming to ask me anyway. Again, I came up with a solution. I wrote down on a piece of A4 paper a list of all the jobs he had to do. In big letters at the bottom I put, "Do not come to my office unless you have completed all the above tasks." All was underlined several times. I thought that's foolproof, but not quite. Richard popped his head round my door the very next day and asked what I wanted him to do. He had chosen that very day to put on a clean pair of pants, and my list was in the pocket of his others that were in the wash. I now hated Richard more than anything else in the world, but giving up is just not in my nature. I was starting to develop a facial tic, not unlike Inspector Clouseau's boss Herbert Lom in The Pink Panther. but determined to show him who he was dealing with, I laminated the new improved Mark II list and I stuck it to the wall in the workshop. I marched him to the workshop, made him stand in front of the list, which was printed on Dayglow paper. I drew round his feet with a yellow tyre crayon. I then drew big yellow footprints all the way to the back door, which he had to come through in the morning, and a big arrow with "This way, Richard" written next to it. Next morning, Groundhog Day. What do you want me to do next? Jesus, Richard, why haven't you read the list? To which he said, there's a van parked in front of it. Richard made the most of his head start and he showed more initiative then than he had in the previous weeks. He set off like Linford Christie. As soon as I commenced my countdown, unfortunately for him, fueled by adrenaline and an overwhelming desire to kill him, I set off like Usain Bolt. I'm going to take the fifth on what happened when I caught him. Suffice to say that I just hope they never have cause to dig up the foundations of the workshop while I'm still alive. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Bye bye.